Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you all this evening. My name is Gerard Mijon. I'm the CEO of Natural Womanhood, and I am filling in for Grace Emily Stark, who is our editor, was supposed to be here tonight, and she can't, and we apologize. But it is my privilege to welcome you all to the webinar on how to overcome your fears to talk about fertility with your daughter. And I'm very excited to hear from our co-host, Jackie Aguilar, and our guest speaker, Julia Hogan-Werner. But just a couple of words first, before we start. First of all, we are recording this webinar and it will be published later this week. If you have questions, we would like to ask you to please post them in the comment space and we'll try to answer all of them. I'm not sure we'll get to all of them, but we'll try to answer as many as possible. And if not, we'll find ways to answer them in other ways. Now, this webinar is organized by Natural Womanhood, and most of you are probably familiar with Natural Womanhood, but if you are not, Natural Womanhood is a nonprofit dedicated to the promotion of fertility awareness and natural family planning as essential tools for women's health. We actually believe that all women can learn to claim their natural fertility as beautiful, powerful, and healthy. And our website provides extensive information for women, couples, and moms with over 600 articles, webcasts, videos, and a podcast, all on women reproductive health from a fertility awareness lens. So now we are now providing more interactive and in-person programs like the Cycle Mindfulness Clubs for college students you may have heard of. And of course, the Mother of PreTeen online course, which many of you already signed up for. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Jackie Aguilar, and who is going to lead the conversation with our guest. So Jackie is Natural Womanhood's Director of Education, and as such, she oversees the Cycle Mindfulness Clubs and the Mother of PreTeens program. Jackie is a fertility awareness educator trained in the symptothermal method with Couple to Couple League, as well as a Creighton-trained fertility care practitioner, which means that she teaches girls and women to chart their cycle using the Creighton ovulation method. She's also the mom of 5 children, including 2 teen daughters. So Jackie is going to introduce the topic of the night and our guest, Julie. Jackie?
Okay. Thanks, Gerard. Thanks so much. We are really excited about this new Mother of PreTeen program that is about to launch. It's almost ready. It's launching May 1st. There are different levels that we're going to offer, but overall, there are 7 PDF guides included, 7 videos for moms on topics like this to help prepare them for the conversation, 10 short videos for moms and teens to watch together to cover the curriculum, and then 6 more webinars just like this one tonight with different experts covering a range of different really awesome topics. Gerard will put the link to the registration in the chat. So if you haven't already registered, we encourage you to do that. There is a 25% discount being offered through this Friday, so through April 28th. So don't miss out on that. Tonight, we're focusing on the topic of overcoming fears that moms have when having the discussion about fertility with their daughters. This past year, as we were working to develop the program, through our research, we noticed that mothers had a lot of fear when it came to having these discussions. We believe that mothers should be the primary educators of their daughters. So part of the program initially here is to help moms overcome these fears so that they can be prepared and be equipped to have these conversations with their daughters. That's why tonight's topic is so important. If you have concerns, if you're one of those moms that has these worries or apprehensions about starting these conversations, trust me, you are not alone. I'm right there with you. And tonight, hopefully we can help to overcome some of these fears and get us prepared to have these awesome conversations with our daughters. So tonight we've invited a really special speaker to help us with this topic, Julie Hogan. She is a counselor from Chicago. She is the owner of Vitae Optimum Counseling and Consulting, LLC. She also leads workshops and writes on topics related to self-care, relationships, and mental health. Her book, It's Okay to Start With You, is all about the power of embracing your authentic self through self-care. She is passionate about empowering individuals to be their most authentic selves. And you can find more about her writing online at her website, juliamariehogan.com. So, Julia, thank you for joining us. I think you've written another book also since this.
I have. I guess I need to update my bio. Yes, my second book actually about a year ago was published, and it's called A Work in Progress, Embracing the Life God Gave You. So kind of building on my themes from the first book.
That's wonderful. Oof, I apologize for that. Great. To start off the topic, can you tell us a little bit more about your background with fertility awareness and your work with moms and with teens?
Absolutely. I'm first of all so happy to be here today. Really excited to have this conversation because I think it's a really important one. And I come to the world of fertility awareness through my work as a licensed clinical professional counselor. So I'm a mental health counselor, and in my private practice, we work a lot with women. And so I often find that I've sort of unofficially become a point of contact for women in referring them to fertility awareness instructors, and kind of bringing some education into my work with them about what is normal and what's not normal. Not in the sense of, what a doctor or a nurse should be sharing, but more just really encouraging my clients to advocate for themselves. If they're in a session and they're telling me that their periods are really painful, for example, or they know that something's off and they're going to see their doctor and their doctor is brushing them off and saying, "You're fine, don't worry about it." I see my role as a counselor as someone who encourages clients to advocate for themselves and to not just accept no, or that's just the way it is as an answer. So I find that I serve sort of this role of a link, right? And kind of helping clients explore the world of fertility awareness by connecting them with resources and with instructors that they may have never even heard of the term before. And so really it's an honor to be able to kind of introduce that topic to them and help them take that next step in their journey. And so I'm working with women who are experiencing issues related to fertility that, again, I'm encouraging and referring them out, but also moms who are thinking about their daughters and wanting them to have a positive relationship with their own fertility, kind of navigating those processes too. And so that's kind of where I have sort of seen my role in that, right, is encouraging my clients, moms, daughters, women, single, married, engaged, children or no children, really encouraging them all to take charge of their health and advocate for themselves, and to feel empowered to gain information and to learn, and to not feel afraid or to feel like intimidated maybe by those sorts of things too.
I guess it sounds like because you give them the freedom to be empowered, that they do have some kind of uh, it's not too confusing for them to understand, what they need in order to take care of themselves. And so giving them that freedom or that ability to, like, yes, you can, so they can seek that out for themselves. That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of, I would say, kind of encouraging my clients to trust their gut, that we all have an intuition. And I think sometimes people try to squash that intuition, so to speak, but we know ourselves well, right? We know ourselves. We have a sense of what our baseline is and what's right and what's not right. And I think the same can extend to mothers and knowing their daughters as well.
That's great. Do you think also, like we were stating earlier, that moms should be the primary educators of their daughters?
Mhm.
Um, why do you think this would be important?
Yeah, I think that's actually really probably something that isn't talked about enough in society at large, parenting circles. I think, like I was saying, we as women have a very strong intuition. And I think that's just amplified when women become mothers and they know their daughters well. And, maybe sometimes that translates to worrying about them, but also that they have this role, right? Being a mother is such a unique role to have, and it's such a special relationship to have with your daughter. And so I think being able to honor that role, part of that is being an educator to your daughter and helping her navigate the milestones in life or the different seasons that she's going through, because a mom can do that in a unique way that really nobody else can, right? I think, we can gain value from the medical profession and from educators, and they bring valuable things to the table, but I think nothing can replace the just the knowledge and the specialness of the relationship a mom has with her daughter for navigating these types of really sensitive issues.
Right. Right. They have a lot to do with a daughter's development, like physically and mentally and emotionally. And like you have to be with someone throughout their life, gradually seeing them day by day change to be able to know where they are in that process of mental maturity or emotional maturity or physical maturity. And so that's like the unique privilege you have as a mom to watch them and see their changes little by little.
Yeah, and I think you can use that too to inform the gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the individual approach with your daughter, right? Especially if you have more than one daughter, you might approach this conversation one way with one daughter, knowing her and kind of, what would be most helpful. And you might approach it in a totally different way with your other daughter, right? So I do think that you can really tailor your approach in a way that maybe just, information from, meeting with a doctor or something, they might not be able to provide that unique approach.
Why do you think it's so important that the mom versus some other resource or some other outside influence be the primary educator in this topic for daughters?
I think really for, what we were just talking about, just that uniqueness of the relationship, and that a mother knows her daughter and has really, like you were saying, Jackie, all of she's witnessed her from before birth, right? In that sense of knowing all those milestones that she's met, her temperament, personality, all of kind of what she's worried about or what she's excited about, all those different things, that you can get that really individualized approach that I think is really important when talking about fertility awareness, and just wanting to set the stage for having it be an empowering conversation, right? One that a mom can really, I would say, kind of set the narrative, set the tone for this conversation for the rest of her daughter's life. And I mean that in like an empowering way. Like
Yeah.
that's such a great opportunity to do, as opposed to, I think sometimes, it more sort of blanket approach, you lose that individualness, right? And you just gain information, but you don't really, it's harder to be there for your daughter to help her navigate through that, right?
Yeah.
Just through, I don't know, maybe like watching a video at school or something like that.
It's so affirming. Okay, awesome. Thank you. What so so what do you see when working with moms? What are some of the roadblocks that prevent mom from being that primary educator? What are some of the things that get in the way?
I think sometimes there's um like we feel sometimes that we have to do a perfect job at things, right? I don't want to mess up. I don't want to fail. I want to make sure I deliver this perfectly, but sometimes that can almost be paralyzing. I am so afraid I'm not going to do a perfect job that I don't even want to try. And so I want to, leave it to the experts and let them handle it. And really, like, I think then we don't give ourselves enough credit, like for all the reasons that we just said, that we know our daughters well, and we've been with them and helped them navigate so many moments in life so far, even in their young age, and that we have something to give and something really unique to offer them in this conversation. And so I think that confidence, is a big piece, or perhaps missing not having that positive experience ourselves. So if we didn't have a mother figure there to kind of walk us through, to be that primary educator for us and walk us through, we might not have a model for that. So that could be another factor that weighs into. But I think, the biggest piece with all of that is, these fears can be there, but we don't have to let them hold us back, right? That we can find ways to move through them if we really want to be the primary educator for our daughters.
Yeah, I know it's like we're super busy right now. I mean, like the fact that we have the five kids and they're taking us all these different directions. I know really being intentional about making the time, I think has been really difficult to where like I want to start something with her, but I don't block off that time. And I want to be more intentional about that because I want her to know that she can come to me and that I'm going to make her a priority.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really great point, Jackie, because I think about, what in the work of counseling, one of the most important things is the relationship, the therapeutic alliance between the client and the therapist. And if that quality isn't there in the relationship, change can't happen. That's what the research says. The research says that's more important than any specific method that you use in therapy. And I think that applies to all human relationships, that if that relationship foundation isn't there, it's a lot harder to communicate information or to support someone. And I mean, that's what you were just saying right there, right? Is like spending intentional time with your daughter, even if you're not having a serious conversation with her, if you're just spending time with her, you're communicating that you care about her and you're building that foundation. So then when it comes time to have maybe a more serious conversation, you've got this wealth of a relationship that you can draw upon, which is really, really important and really, really beautiful. So setting the stage, right?
That's great. That's great. Um, so speaking more about these fears that moms have, uh, what kind of fears do you see that moms have, and um, what you kind of makes their apprehension in addressing this area of, with their daughters?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few. I think some of them maybe have to do with our own experiences when we started our period, or the first messages that we received about puberty and menstruation, and they aren't always positive, unfortunately. So I think sometimes women can experience shame or around their bodies and periods, or to sometimes kind of see that process as gross in that way. And so if we're kind of struggling with that messaging, it can be hard to think about, how do I communicate this to my daughter in a way when I'm kind of working through these experiences myself. And so I think those messages that we receive, can really shape us in those conversations that we have.
Um, and what about like the fear maybe that like the when our daughters, when we want to approach them, but they kind of push back away from us, like, because they have some kind of apprehension about talking about serious topics. Like, no, mom, I just want to have fun. I don't want to have to deal with something that's complicated, or that, I don't want to grow up. I just want to be a kid. I have one daughter that's totally like that. She's like, don't talk to me about anything about growing up. I don't want to ever drive. I don't want to move out. I just want to be a kid forever. And, she's so precious and sweet, but it's hard to, um, then I'm like, well, then I have apprehension about approaching her about the topic because I know that she's not always open to it.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that is definitely, I'm sure, on a lot of moms' minds, thinking about, okay, I know probably how my daughter's going to react. And now I'm sort of like preemptively assuming, or kind of, reacting as if she's already experienced that, reaction. But um, I think it's a good reminder that we can set the tone, right? As adults, we can model to children how to have serious conversations. And so even just, maybe acknowledging how she's feeling while also maintaining your own, I don't know, composure, for lack of a better word, right? I know that you might feel uncomfortable talking about this, but it's really important. And I want to make sure that you and I get a chance to talk about it first before you might hear about it from one of your friends at school. Or, maybe normalizing, yes, I can tell this feels uncomfortable for you to talk about, and that's okay. This is new information, or I know that this isn't fun to talk about. And that's a very normal reaction to have. And I want to walk through this together as mother and daughter and answer any questions that you might have, or just approach the topic, and we can always touch base later, right? But kind of, sort of a gentle startup, I think, in those situations can be really helpful. But I think, Jackie, your point being not letting our fear of our daughter's reaction turn into avoidance for us, where we keep putting off the conversation and putting it off because we don't want to make her uncomfortable. That it probably maybe it will be an uncomfortable conversation, but that will be time limited, right? It will be uncomfortable for however long that conversation lasts, but then you'll have given her that information that she now has, which is so important. And helping, like I said, model, we can have uncomfortable conversations. They don't have to be lighthearted and fun necessarily, but they also don't have to be terrible, right?
Yeah.
We can get through it. And I think that brings up another point of just like sometimes shame can come up, right? If we didn't have a positive experience with our fertility, or we're still navigating health issues, or we have our own complicated feelings about our body and fertility and what our journey has been, I think sometimes we judge ourselves because we can't offer this like rosy glowing picture of fertility awareness to our daughters, and how do you navigate that dissonance there, right? How do you communicate something without letting your experience kind of, I don't know, maybe scare or intimidate her? And that's a tough situation to navigate too, I think. And one, I think maybe many moms have, things like miscarriages and endometriosis, all sorts of infertility, things like that can really be struggles and legitimate, real challenges, lifelong challenges for some women. And yeah, how do you talk about those things without overwhelming your daughter, without, leaving her maybe more worried than feeling empowered in these, related to this topic?
Mhm. I think also I know, at least in my personal experience, I would resent, and I think this was maybe a walk in my, also like my kind of my virtue and growing of not being so selfish. But when I first started having children and seeing that like I required more sacrifice on my part at times, when they're little,
Mhm.
than it did of my husband, it then a lot of those maybe lies that society tells us that, it's better to be a man, or you're weak if you're a woman, or you get the short end of the stick because you're a woman, or like I would let those things kind of fester in my mind, and they would bring up negative um, ideas about what it means to be a woman. And I have to remind myself what the truth is. I mean, the fact that I have a unique closeness with my children that my husband doesn't have, because
Mhm.
of those sacrifices that I made for them, like because that was unique to my body. And reminding myself of those realities, and it's like, okay, then I can pass that positive experience on to my daughters, because I don't want them to, believe maybe those negative ideas about women that society might push on them.
Yeah, and I think that also puts you in a very unique position to be able to have those conversations, right? Because you said all of these sacrifices I've made have brought me closer to my children and really, strengthen the bond that we have. And so you can, like we were talking about before, build on that foundation of the relationship to talk about some of these things. And then, like you were saying, communicating the facts of fertility awareness, but also shining a positive light on them, not necessarily creating this like fake positive picture, right? That I don't know, your periods will always be painless or something like that, right? Or what's PMS? I don't even know. But, to be able to share the realities, but also helping your daughter see the beauty in that, or the gift in being a woman, even if there are some challenges that she might face along the way.
Mhm. Awesome. So how do we as moms recognize when we have these fears, and how do we maybe try to understand them and work through them to increase our comfort in talking with our daughters?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is spending that time to grow in self-awareness, to spend that time reflecting on what are my attitudes around fertility awareness, and what kind of emotions come up when I think about it. What has my experience been? What fears, like we were just talking about, what fears do I have around this? And can I kind of dialogue with myself about these things? Can I get a clear sense of what my experience is and how I want to communicate it to my daughter in a way that, I am able to give her this gift, as opposed to maybe letting my negative experience with fertility, for example, or the challenges I faced, not bleed into this conversation that I'm having with her, if that makes sense. I think being curious about what am I feeling, right? So not necessarily saying, well, I shouldn't have any negative feelings around fertility awareness, for example, or I shouldn't be worried about my daughter, so I need to just squash that fear and get it out of the way, right? That never works. But instead, really asking yourself, where's that fear coming from for me? Can I explore that? Can I gain a deeper understanding of myself and what that fear is? And can I then engage in problem solving? Can I find a solution to that fear? Or can I talk to my daughter in the way that I wish I had been talked to, right? To kind of transform that experience and really think about how I can use what's going on. So some self-compassion is really powerful there too, along with self-awareness, to acknowledge the challenges we've faced and to be kind to ourselves that we've gone through those challenges related to our fertility, and then communicating to our daughters in that same compassionate voice, right? Acknowledging that it might be an uncomfortable conversation for her, acknowledging that this information might be totally overwhelming for her. Mom, I just want to go outside and play. Why are we talking about this, right? And then supporting her as you're having that conversation and being available for questions, right? But that all starts with that self-awareness and really looking into our own experiences and what kind of I don't know, biases do I have surrounding fertility? Do I see it as a burden as opposed to a gift? How do I explain the struggles that I've been through? What would I want my daughter to know so that she feels aware but empowered, for example, those sorts of things. So I think really identifying and working through those fears can be really, really helpful, because then it allows you to get a firm understanding on kind of where you are with your experience, and you've dealt with that in a sense. So then when you go to share with your daughter, you're sharing from, I would say, like a clear mind, right? And that you're not accidentally bringing in some of your own fears surrounding. And that could translate, for example, into the language that you're using around a period, right? And what you're talking about. And that maybe you're just using neutral language instead of, like, oh, you're bleeding and there's blood everywhere and you have to use pads and, this sort of thing. But kind of, even if you're just focusing on just the scientific language for it, right? And using clinical language that removes that judgment, because your daughter's looking to you, right? How is mom talking about this? Even though I'm uncomfortable, I'm pretending like I'm not listening or this is not cool. I'm still, taking it in and soaking it in. And so how my mom talks about it is really communicating. Is there shame around this? Is this gross? Or is this normal? Is this empowering? Right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm talking about the self-awareness, because how we think about things and talk about things, then we're communicating, sometimes even in nonverbal ways, to our daughter. And I don't mean to say that in sort of like a, oh my gosh, think of all the things that could go wrong kind of way, more in an empowering way, right? Like, yes, okay, if I spend the time thinking about how I think about this, and then what do I want my daughter to learn, then I can create a plan for how I want to communicate this to her so that I can help her feel empowered and informed in a way that either I wish I had or I was, and I want to pass that along to her.
Right. That's so beautiful. Yeah, thinking, how do I want her to perceive it
Mhm.
in a positive light or not? And so eh, when moms think about maybe what to say or what not to share
Mhm.
about our own experiences, what's beneficial, or how do we think about what will benefit the conversation and maybe what we should think about avoiding?
Yeah, I think for bringing in the reasons that I just talked about, I think that's a good place to start. So really spending some time thinking about your own experience. How did you first find out about your period, and what was your first period like, and what's my relationship with my body now and fertility and all of that. But then also, I think making sure that when we share information, we share age appropriate information, right? And so a good rule of thumb with that is answering the questions that your daughter asks, but just focusing on giving her the information that she asked for. So not necessarily providing extra, right? So if she says, well, what are we bleeding out when we have a period, right? Okay, you're shedding the lining of your your uterus, and maybe I have a diagram or something like that, right? But not going into, well, okay, so this is what happens, the egg and this and travels here, and then when you're not pregnant and this and that, and right, it's like that's way too overwhelming. But just focusing on answering the question that she asked and keeping it simple and age appropriate language. I will say, though, it's important to use the proper terminology. That's really important. And that's something that my clients who are moms, we talk about the importance of using the correct. So, using terms like vagina and not using a euphemism, because then that that communicates, oh, this is something that we don't talk about, right? Or that maybe there's shame, and so we need to use a different word instead of this. So I think for our daughter's knowledge, but also safety too, right? So if someone, heaven forbid, were to touch them inappropriately, that they can use the right terminology for what happened, right? Instead of not knowing the right word for something like that. So yes, being age appropriate in the information that you share, but also using the correct scientific terms is really important, so that she can grow in awareness and be confident too.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think knowing that we don't have to say everything all at once. Like she asks one question and we might think, oh, she wants to know how babies are made and I have to explain all this other, like, no, just she's asking specifically about this one thing and we can answer her there and not have to worry about giving her too much information too early. And you also said, right, using the appropriate terms. I don't remember where I heard, but that also adds to maybe our credibility as moms or whatever, because then maybe somebody else comes along and they use the proper term and they say, oh, your mom calls it this nickname. Oh, it's because she doesn't know what she's talking about. Like you would never want someone to put you in a light where they discredit your credibility with your child. Or
Absolutely. Yes. And then I think that also, like you said, builds a common language too. So that it bridges the gap between, if she's talking to her doctor, or you're talking to the doctor, right? That everybody's using the same language there to describe things, which I think is really helpful as well. Yeah.
That's great.
I have a little follow-up question on what you were talking about earlier. And one of the components we have in our program to help mom prepare for it is we invite her to actually journal about her past experience. Because when we were doing the research, we heard a lot of moms that didn't necessarily have a very good experience learning it, right? And maybe surprised and so on. But we think, there are also times where maybe that was traumatic and maybe is it okay for mom to talk about some traumatic things and how? And then the second question I have is, who could be the ally, partner of mom to help her deal with some of those things that maybe she's never had a chance to talk to anyone about in terms of her own feelings and experience in this area?
Yeah, I think those questions go hand in hand, because I think, like I was saying, growing in self-awareness is so important. So it's actually really cool to hear that you have that journal exercise in your program. And I think that, in journaling or growing awareness about our own experiences, I think that we can draw upon, several different sources of support if we have a sense that we need to kind of work through some things on our own before we talk to our daughters about fertility. And that could be talking to a trusted medical professional. So talking to a doctor or a nurse about, particular issues, or if you're like, gosh, I don't even know how to describe what happens, I need to talk to someone who's a medical expert and get some information there. It can also be meeting with a therapist to talk through some things, because we can, sometimes we invalidate our own difficult experiences because we don't know what to do with them. It can actually be really healing to talk it through with someone. I've had great conversations with clients about, difficult labor and delivery experiences that they had, that they felt like, well, my baby was healthy, and so I shouldn't feel upset that my birth didn't go according to the way that I wanted it to, for example. But my clients have found a lot of healing in being able to talk through it and acknowledge, okay, this happened and it wasn't okay. And, but this was the outcome, and I can acknowledge all of that in my experience and have it be something that is no longer feeling like I'm carrying around this trauma with me, but that I feel like I have processed that experience and I can tell my story and things like that. So I would say that's really important, to not be afraid to reach out. And I mean, also sharing experiences with your friends, that can be really powerful too, because sometimes I think we feel alone in our experiences. And so having a community of women that we trust, who we can share our stories with, is really, really important for that. And I think, to the first part of your question, that, I think sharing again in an age appropriate way, things that a mom has gone through, right? So maybe if a daughter is asking about a miscarriage, for example, maybe sharing it, not maybe, but sharing it in an age appropriate way would be really important. And again, just answering the question that she asked and not providing too much detail that might be confusing or open up more questions that she's not necessarily ready for or wants to know the answers to quite yet, because those follow-up questions can always come, right? And, I think a theme we're talking about here is building that solid foundation of a positive relationship with our daughters outside of any sort of serious discussion. And so she knows that she can come back and ask a follow-up question, because we've introduced the topic and we've talked about it in a neutral / empowering way. So she's not feeling shame when she's coming with a question. She's not feeling like this question is too dumb or too stupid, or she shouldn't be asking, that she knows mom's an open book. I can come and I can ask her about this change I'm noticing or something a kid said at school. And I know that she's there for me, and she's not going to say, oh, why are you wondering that? Or, oh, we don't talk about that in this family, or, those sorts of things. So it's not necessarily a one and done conversation, right? You're building that foundation to hopefully have sort of chapters of that conversation unfold over time too.
Thank you. It's so great. Another question we had is, how can we increase our daughters' confidence about their bodies and being comfortable talking about these topics? How can we reduce maybe their discomfort or fear with these conversations?
Again, I think a big component of that is modeling. And so how we as mothers and as adults, how we talk about these things, because the language that we use or the expressions that we use are absorbed by our kids. So a slightly different topic, but I have a lot of clients who, when we talk about their relationship with their body, so body image, and many of them, their earliest memory around body image is something that a woman in their family, a comment that they made about either their body or my client's body or food or something like that, right? Like, oh, if you keep eating like that, you're going to have to shop in, this section or that section for clothes. So those kinds of comments, that sends the message to the, in this case, my client, that food is not something that's meant for fuel or to nourish us, right? But it's something that's bad and that we should try to restrict as much as possible, because this, like my grandma or my mom found me unworthy because I don't look a certain way. I think the same thing can happen with fertility, that if we use words like gross or dirty or disgusting, right, that communicates our fertility is something to hide away, or that's shameful, or we wish we didn't have it. It's this huge inconvenience, right? So I think how we model these conversations, both when we're having a conversation with our daughters, but also in how we just talk about it, right? Because if my daughter overhears something that I'm saying and she picks up on the language that I'm using, then that message gets encoded in her brain, like, oh, this is how mom feels about this. And so I'm feeling now the same way too, because she thinks it's gross, and so it must be gross, right? Or the other kids at school are calling it gross, and mom says it's gross. So now that, I don't have an alternative view. And so that's how I'm receiving this information now.
That makes so much sense. I mean, and it does go back to that self-awareness. We do have to be aware. I'm already starting to think back in my own head, what comments have I made maybe when I'm on my period, or I'm, experiencing PMS or whatever, and I'm not being the most gracious person at the time. And so how do I make sure to always have self-awareness because I am being an example to my daughters all those times. And I want
Yeah,
to,
and I think it's not about being perfect, right? I think that's really important to note, that it's not like we can never have a, have a bad day or something like that. I think what's more important is that we are able to repair, right? So to be able to say, hey, I know the other day was a little bit grumpy and I was talking about, like, oh, PMSing again or whatever, right? I just want to reiterate, that's not actually what I was thinking. Or I want to just say, like, I don't like when I use that language, and I'm going to try to be better about it, because that's not really what I want to think, right? So it's not about being perfect. And if you notice, okay, hey, not my best moment, said this comment or that, right? You can
yeah,
always go back and repair that little rupture. And that creates, I think, even more of a positive, like it just keeps adding that deposit to the positive relationship that you have with your daughter, if that makes sense. Like a little piggy bank, right? And you're just putting those deposits in.
Almost like about being natural and being honest, right? So it's like, this is what I'm, oh yeah, this is what's happening. Oh, it's not very fun, but it's good. Right?
Mhm.
right.
It's
Yeah.
good.
And that's so reassuring, or so, yeah, refreshing to know that, okay, yeah, I don't have to be perfect and I can still be, there for my daughter and be a good source for her.
Absolutely. Yes. There was in attachment theory there, I think his first name was John Bowlby. He was a researcher, and he's the one who came up with attachment theory. And basically what he talked about a lot is, it's not about being perfect, right? It's about, his term was being the good enough mom, right? So you are there enough times for your daughter, and you repair those kind of ruptures in relationship when they happen, and you're a good enough mom, and that's all you need to be, right? As opposed to being a perfect mom. So I think that I really love that phrasing, just because I think it kind of takes some of the pressure off, right? It's not like I have to be this perfect sort of like robot who never makes a mistake and who isn't human. It's just that I take accountability for my actions, and when I mess up, I apologize or I make changes. And that's what my daughter sees, right? My daughter sees someone who isn't perfect, but she takes responsibility for her actions. And I can see that she's a strong person, and I want to be like her.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, in going over in my mind all the resources that we put together in this program. Yeah, we don't have to be a perfect mom. We have these resources here to step by step guide us through how to have the conversations. We have, the science and the data put together, that we don't have to know ourselves, but we have someone that can present it along with us, so that we make sure that what our daughter is receiving is accurate and scientific. And that is so comforting as a mom to know, okay, I'm not doing this alone. I have an ally. I have a community here that's going to walk through. I mean, yeah, we set up a Facebook page for everyone that registers for the program. So we have community. We're not alone in this. And so we don't have to be perfect. We can walk together through this process of educating our daughters, and it'll be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, because there's so much wonder. I mean, natural womanhood, you have all this information that you share and put together that I think is really hard to find in other outlets. And so, being able, I think, for moms to be able to access this information in such a great like organized, right? That you can go, okay, these are the things that are most helpful. This is what the research says. Tips and suggestions, I think all is such a beautiful thing, so that nobody feels like they have to reinvent the wheel, right? That they can just go directly to the experts and get that information, and then personalize it in knowing their daughters and their relationship.
And that's what we try to do in the series, the 10 video series, where we have short videos are engaging with a lot of information. And Jackie did a wonderful job. I mean, we're still editing some of them, and it's really, really cool. But it's a lot of information, but then we have, it's short, and then there are questions to help mom and daughter to dialogue about it, right? Because I think it's the more important part. Is like, hey, what surprised you about this? Or have a little suggestion for a quick conversation. Shouldn't be this long 2-hour thing, but little by little, bite size, right? But I have a question too on, I mean, two questions. The first one, I'll start with the first one. Is one you were talking about the the challenges of how the messages that a mom may have received. And I mean, there's a culture where in the past 50 years it's like suppress your fertility, right? It's like, so fertility is pretty a bad word almost, and the pill and all that. So do you think that plays a role in moms kind of way of seeing things and seeing themselves, and how do they overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that you're right that the messaging for so long has been your fertility is something basically to suppress and get rid of until you want to have children. And then you want your fertility. And then after you have the number of children you want, then you don't want it again. Right. But I think what a really amazing thing is, and, natural womanhood is a part of it, is providing this alternative perspective, right? One where your fertility is an important marker of your overall health, and that it's part of who you are and is something that is really invaluable and something to live with, right? And to embrace and see as part of yourself. And that provides a wealth of information about your health, for example, and that it isn't something that we can, or isn't something that we need to just sort of suppress because it's an inconvenience, right? I think, natural womanhood is really presenting it as this is a gift that all women have. And this is something that, through understanding and embracing, we can really develop a positive relationship with ourselves and our bodies and our health too, and not have to miss out on this piece, right? I think we're getting a very narrow interpretation of fertility from society at large, right? That it's this it only leads to children and it's an inconvenience in that way. And I think projects like the one that you are working on at Natural Womanhood provides an alternative in that sense, right? Like, let's look at the whole picture of fertility and what it means and all of the roles that these different hormones play in your body, and how understanding it can actually be an amazing thing, both I think from a health perspective, but then also just from like an identity perspective too.
I've experienced what you're describing in my lived experience of teaching women about their fertility. When you talk about how the different hormones influence their overall well-being, how that affects their emotions, how there's just a whole body component to this, that they either like realize it for themselves, like their face lightens up, or they look at their partner and be like, see, I told you there's nothing wrong with me. Like, they have this empowering moment where they're like, wow, I am so great just the way I am. And I knew it all along. I knew there was something I was missing. And then the subsequent reaction is, why didn't I know about this sooner? Why didn't anybody tell me that I was amazing and beautiful just the way I was? And I'm so glad that we have this opportunity through this program to tell our daughters from the beginning, from the moment they start growing into women, that you are beautiful just the way you are. You don't have to change. You don't have to change for anybody. And so they don't have to have that reaction or that aha moment later on, but they grow up knowing how amazing they are.
Yeah. And I think that's so cool to think about, right? That you get to, people talk a lot about like breaking generational cycles. And I think that's what this can be, which is amazing, right? That you get to say, okay, I grew up with this message, or, the women in generations past, we all grew up with this message that your fertility is something that you don't want, that it's a hindrance, it's this burden that you have to have. But like you're saying, Jackie, to be able to present this totally different narrative around fertility, and that it's actually something that we can embrace it, even if it brings us challenges, that we can embrace it and see it as part of our whole selves and not something to hide away. I mean, how cool is that, right? Thinking about, am I setting up my future generations for success with all of this? And then I can kind of break that narrative. It stops with me. That's cool.
That's really the vision behind the program, and thank you for pointing out that, putting that out. This is really why we're so excited about this new program. One more question and I want to encourage people online to put their questions in the chat. We still have a few minutes before the end, so feel free, anyone to put any questions there. But one more question is, this is a program, this is the mother of preteen programs, but there's dad in the picture. I am a dad. And so what is your advice? What could those moms tell their husbands, or how they can be supportive? How can a dad be supportive of mom and maybe of the daughter in this process of teaching the daughters about their fertility?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good question. Maybe there's a future for a dad program at Natural Womanhood. Yes. Okay.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet, but yes, actually, at some point.
In the 5-year plan or something, right? I think the first thing that came to mind when you were asking the question was helping dads grow in education themselves. That I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there from a male perspective about the female body. And so not that dad needs to be having those conversations with his daughter, right? That we want mom to be having those conversations, but even that he is educated to around periods and what exactly is happening, right? And, what goes on in the entire cycle for a woman and things like that, I think is really important, because then he can also sort of just in his attitudes, be embracing more of that neutral to supportive language, right? So not having comments about oh, you're on your period again. Oh, that must be awful. Or I know, I've heard it's so bad or whatever, right? To kind of, educate himself too, so that he can, be aware of the language he's using. And then I think also mom and dad having a conversation too. How are we going to be talking about this when we, when I'm talking to my daughter or our daughter, I want to make sure that we're using common language so that we're a united front going forward. So that's kind of what came to mind when you asked that question.
I with my own daughter, we, because we had these conversations because of my work, really, when she was a teenager, she felt very free to speak about things that maybe she would only talk to mom, but in front of me, and so that really made this is not the taboo thing. This is not something as a dad I'm afraid to hear my daughter talk about. I think that helped her feel accepted and yeah.
I've also noticed, because obviously my husband has learned with me since I'm a practitioner. I educate women, so he's learned all this science right along with me, and he knows to be patient with me at certain times of my cycle. He knows, he's learned my body just as well as I have, and so I see that patience transferring over to our daughters when they just need to cry or they need something that and it's coming out of nowhere. It doesn't shock him. It doesn't what do I do with this? He's like, I know, come here, let me give you a hug.
I got this.
Okay. And he extends that patience to them too, and I'm so grateful that they have that resource in him of someone who will comfort and will walk along with them and not be surprised by the fact that they're women.
Yeah, and that's, those are he's not having this grand speech to them or anything like that, right? He's just showing through his actions that he is there for them in the unique way that they are, his daughters, which is really beautiful.
And it's for dads, it's an encouragement too for them to, and moms, some of the moms listening may not be using fertility awareness method or natural family planning, right? They might be on the form of contraception. So it's an opportunity to maybe explore these options to rediscover natural fertility, and that will need the support of dad, right? That will require the support of dad.
Well, great. Any moms have any last minute questions that they want to put in the chat? Feel free to do that. I know we just have a few minutes left, but if there's something that you'd really like Julia to answer. But also, Julia, we just want to thank you so much for joining us and exploring this topic with us, helping us to figure out how to overcome these fears, reminding us about self-awareness and that we don't have to be perfect. I think all of that was so refreshing and encouraging to me as well. So thank you so much for all of your insights. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I think it's a really important topic. So I'm so glad that you are shining a light on it, and not just shining a light, but developing this program truly. I mean, I'm excited to be able to refer it to my clients. And I think it's just such a great, important conversation to be having. So I'm glad that you're equipping moms everywhere to have those successful conversations with their daughters.
And just to remind all you moms out there that the program is available right now. The link is there in the chat. Take advantage of that 20% off discount. Everything, with the different, you can choose which level you want, but everything from the 7 PDF guides to what, to seeing a doctor, to what's normal, what's not normal, being prepared for periods, the 7 videos for moms on these topics to help prepare them. So we're walking along with the moms, giving them the tools they need to feel prepared to have these conversations. There's even a step-by-step process of how to get started. So helping you think through the planning process of starting the classes or the curriculum with your daughter. The 10 short videos for the moms and teens to watch together to cover the curriculum. And those other 6 webinars with the other experts. So learning from doctors and other professionals to give you a deeper insight into how to share with your daughter and what you need to know. So it's just a wealth of knowledge that's all put together in a nice, organized way for you. So we encourage you to go, and if you found this helpful, share it with other moms. Share the program that if you think that there's other moms have young daughters and they need a way to present this information to their daughters in a positive light and an empowering way, this would be that resource for them. So we encourage you to share it with those moms as well.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Julia. Wonderful time together. And everyone here will stay in touch.
Thanks so much. Have a great evening.